Hey everyone, and welcome to Recharge the Podcast. I'm David Coe. My guest today is a journalist who spent over 15 years covering one of the most intense, politically charged beats in media around energy and climate change. She has broken major stories on presidential administrations. She's interviewed Fortune 500 CEOs and now covers the intersection of AI and energy. It's arguably one of the biggest stories of our time. But recently, in the middle of the AI-obsessed atmosphere of Davos, she stepped away from her usual beat to join me for an intimate dinner. Focused not on the energy that powers our world, but the energy that's within us as humans. I knew then that I had to bring her onto the podcast to continue the conversation. So let's recharge with Amy Harder. Thank you so much for being here today. I am so excited for today's conversation.
Well, you're very welcome. I'm also so excited to be here.
So listen, before we kick off all these podcasts and all these different conversations that we've had, I always start every question for every guest. And that this podcast was inspired by my book, Recharge, where I encourage people to really think about their mental health like a battery. So I want to ask you, and I know you've been traveling and doing a bunch of things. How's your battery today, Amy, and why?
It is not great. I am not going to lie. It is, I have been thinking about this question because I'm an avid listener of your podcast. I would say it's maybe 25 to
Okay.
30%.
Okay.
I've been on the road weekly and I had a big family get together in Portland over the weekend, which was great, positive fun. But it still can drain you. And then I had some work come up over the weekend, a very classic example of how journalism never stops. So I'm still recharging, and I hope to get to that sometime this week. But I'm in town for San Francisco Climate Week, so there may not be too much rest until the weekend.
Well, I hope that battery does go up a little. But, speaking of family gatherings, because actually you just touched on something and we could take a little bit of a detour. I too get like excited about it, but then at some point I always feel a little bit drained after it's over. Do you find that as well, or you find it the other way?
No, I definitely, and I love my family,
Yeah.
to be clear. But you don't necessarily see these folks all the time, and so sometimes the conversation is a lot of small talk. And small talk to me, there's an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm that
Yes.
talks about deep talk and
Yeah.
small talk.
So
And
good. I remember
I,
that.
I like medium talk to deep talk, and so I can find that draining, but it's still wonderful. And I try to remember that even with a drained battery. I want to remember, well, it's drained for a good reason.
Mm.
Now, the work disruption over the weekend was not a good reason to have it drained, but sometimes you can't avoid that.
Exactly. Exactly. We're going to get into work in just a sec. So, you and I met in Davos, and it was at a really unique gathering that Calm held, and we hosted this past February. And I love something you posted, and I want to make sure I get it right here. So I'm going to look at this. And you posted on LinkedIn, and you said it was an oasis of an authentic connection. And you wrote, for one night, I focused on the energy within us as humans. Lose that, and nothing else matters. I got to tell you, Amy, that really just stuck with me. What was it about that gathering at Davos that really felt different for you?
Because it was deeper and, like I said, online, more authentic than just connecting for more money or more clicks
Mm.
or more AI conversations. And it was a rare event for me, no matter where we were. And Davos is sort of the pinnacle of seen and be seen and connections. And that's important. There's obviously a need for that in our capitalistic society. And so I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but we need more of the authentic connections. And this is just the first of many times I'm going to mention this, but AI is underscoring our humanity. And I think the more we can outsource, whether we will or not, the more we need to embrace our humanity. And I worry that's getting lost as we all embrace AI to varying degrees. And so I loved the event, and thank you again for hosting it and including me.
Yeah, and for people who haven't been to Davos or they hear about it, you are just running around from meeting to meeting or session to session. And so I always feel that when you have a chance to slow down and just have some more authentic conversations, especially ones without your phones present. And I did kind of write about how, no one was really picking up their phone throughout the night, although we locked some phones away. But for the people that did have it, they didn't really look at it, which I thought was really cool.
Oh yeah, that's so important. I think we're all on our devices too much. Every Sunday I check in with one of my nieces about how many hours she spends on her
Ah,
phone, and we share it. And I hope it's helpful to her. It's helpful to me. And I've been inspired by some of your habits that you shared,
yeah.
David, about not having phones at the
Yeah.
dinner table. It's hard. I'm not going to lie, but you just got to keep doing it, right? When you just got to get up every time you fall down on those types of habits.
That's right. So I want to take us back a little so we get to know you a little bit more as a person. So you were born in Washington State and raised, and I read about how you really love the outdoors. So how did growing up in the Pacific Northwest really and going outdoors really influence basically the choice of your career and you growing up?
Well, I was born in Seattle, but then we actually moved to the east side of the state
Okay.
when I was 8, which is important for your question because Washington State is divided by a mountain range. And on one side is all the people and the lush forests and all the liberal politics. And that's where I live now. No reflection necessarily on my politics. But on the right side of the state, on the east side, is the dry desert with far fewer people and more conservative
Mm.
politics. And I loved growing up on it. So I grew up on our family's cattle ranch. I think at the time I felt deprived of a white picket fence childhood. But as a child, you always want what you can't have. I think now, reflecting on it as an adult, it really helped me understand how this country is the way that it is. And I hope it's created some empathy that I have for people of just various different backgrounds.
Yeah.
I like to think that because I grew up in a desert like environment, I sort of rebelled and went to the lush forests. And that's why I love trail running and forest bathing, whatever that means to different people. For me, it just means enjoying the forest and soaking it up.
That's so great.
I just love it. It's so peaceful. So it's not, I love to run, but I don't like to run on concrete. I definitely need to have some trees around me.
So how often do you get to go outdoors or how often do you find yourself outdoors?
I try to do it, when I'm not traveling, 3 to 4 days a week at
Oh,
least.
wow.
But
Okay.
even when I'm traveling, I'm a big proponent of always finding time to do a little something.
Yeah.
I was in Scottsdale last week, and that is very much a desert, as we all know. But, there's a short little hike near the conference I was at, and it's just 3 miles. And I'm going to make time to do that in the morning before a busy day because that's just essential. And it took 40 minutes, but you have to make time. Otherwise, at least for me, I will go a little crazy.
We don't want that. We
Correct.
don't want
Nobody
that.
wants that.
So, speaking of climate and all the different topics, I mean, and your own mental health, which you just mentioned, for most of your career, you've covered these just really large and big topics, right? Whether it's around climate, whether it's around the future of the planet. And these aren't light reading stories at times. And so, how do you, in the midst of all these things that you're writing, how do you protect your own mental health? How do you report on issues that are so heavy and polarizing, but at times they can step back and kind of say, okay, I need some of my own time for Amy.
Well, it's almost like a before and after of the AI boom
Mm.
and increasingly the Iran war.
Mm.
So those are arguably two of the biggest storylines right now, and they're both directly related to energy. So there is a lot going on my beat right now, and it makes the past look a little bit like child's play.
Wow.
Climate change is a very much an anxiety-inducing problem, but it's relatively slow moving
Mm.
compared to, say, an Iran war where gasoline prices skyrocket, or the AI boom where massive pieces of infrastructure are getting built in a year or even less. And so I've had to adjust just since I rejoined Axios in September to the fast pace of the news. I mean, it's staggering how fast things are happening. So I would say that part is very much a work in progress on my part. I often think of my life as a couple different buckets, and you don't want any bucket always overflowing.
Sure, that's a great way to think about
And that's why I prioritize a run, even if I probably don't have time for it. I'm still going to make time because otherwise I'm not going to function as good of a human. And that's the most important thing for everybody, not just me.
I want to talk a little bit about you making conscious decisions about work-life balance. And especially when you made that decision when you left the Congress beat and to cover climate. So as we go into climate and talk more about it, why did you make that decision?
Yeah, so way early in my career, back when I was at a DC-based publication called National Journal, I was doing so well on the energy beat. My bosses told me that they promoted me to the congressional leadership beat. And I said, oh, wait, I like the energy beat. I want to stay on that. And I did try to do the congressional leadership beat there for a few months, but it was immediately clear to me that number one, I didn't like the content as much. It's not as multifaceted, in my opinion. I'm sure there's political experts out there that would disagree. But another perhaps overriding reason why I chose not to do that beat is because I would have had very little control over my own work-life balance. Members of the press on Capitol Hill spend hours late into the night staking out meetings to get very little at the end. And I respectfully question the whole strategy because it's extremely inefficient. But then again, some would say Congress is relatively inefficient itself. So one is a reflection of the other. But some people like that, and I respect them for that. It wasn't for me. And so I consciously decided to stay on a beat that I felt passionate about, but also that afforded me somewhat good work-life balance, particularly compared to the other beats. I had another sort of pivot point in my career when I was at the Wall Street Journal, and actually the President Trump had, or at that point, candidate Trump had just won his first election. And whenever that happens in Washington, everybody seems to change jobs. So I had a few different offers coming my way, including one at CNN. And they wanted me to cover extreme weather. And then I had some other opportunities, including at Axios, which at the time, it hadn't even launched yet. I ultimately went with Axios thinking I would double down on energy and climate instead of going into what could have been a TV route. And that was another point where, like, I could probably be more famous going to something like CNN, but I don't want that. I want something that's fulfilling for me as a human and also something that preserves my work-life balance. I'm sure I left things on the table, money, prestige, fame, but I don't really care about those things.
I mean that's, for most people as they will hear you talk about these things, you have these opportunities. How do you make that decision to protect your work-life balance, which is very important to you, to push off when people say this is a promotion and you're like, I actually don't like this, right? So I think sometimes people don't realize how hard it is for individuals to kind of at times like say, no, I want this other route, right? And you've kind of done that a few times. And then you had this chance to be on TV, as you were saying, multitude of other areas, and then you choose something that's not as well known at the time. I know we hit that really fast as you kind of went through it, but it's a really big for most people. They're like, wait, what, she had all these opportunities? How did you choose between all of them and stick with it?
It's hard. And I think in most societies, particularly in America, the answer is usually yes and more.
Yes.
And and to be clear, like I work hard, I do a lot of work. It's not that I'm a lazy person, but it's the balance of recognizing that the decision you might make is going to be less good for you overall down the line, even if immediately it seems like the right call. And it's something that I will never figure out perfectly. It's always a work in progress. I think one thing that I think about a lot is this concept of people tend to chase what's good and exciting. And that's why AI is such a hot topic. It's because it's something new and it's going to make our lives easier. And making the analogy to my job, I probably could have gotten more money and more high profile opportunities, but I would be losing nuance. And respect. And I hope I have a reputation of being a nuanced reporter. And so sometimes instead of chasing the good and the better, it's important to avoid something that's bad and something you don't want. It's a very nuanced thing, but it's really important to me to think about because I'm often making choices that may not be the most exciting thing, but that is the least bad thing.
Yeah.
And so I hope that makes sense the way I describe
No,
that because
absolutely.
it's really important to me. And everybody's making trade-offs in their lives, and I think people don't talk about it that
Yeah.
much. And so I hope by talking about it, it helps other people make a decision to say, hey, I actually don't want to take that job because of X, Y.
Yeah, I think that's, and thank you for sharing that, Amy. I think so often, for so many of us, as we're confronted with different decisions, and now we're about to have our AI conversation, and it can be quite daunting. And sometimes people don't have the luxury of having all these opportunities as you've been given. But just to hear kind of like what are some of the pillars for you and the underlying blocks for who you are as we get to know you better is just awesome because it's a great way for us to just get to know you and how you've made certain decisions in your life.
Well, thank you. And I hope it's resonating with people.
Yeah, I love that. So, as we switch and talk a little bit about AI and the human costs here, you're deep in the AI conversations, deep in the energy stories around like data centers, for example, space, chips. I mean, it's just electricity and demand. It's all over the news. And it's a fascinating story for so many of us. We're just wrapped up in this story. But it's also contributing on the other side to lots of people having burnout or kind of worrying about this always on culture. Will we be even more on going forward as a culture with all of these improvements or not? And maybe this feeling that we're never going to be able to disconnect. I've heard this over and over again. Um, what are your thoughts about all this? You're in the midst of everything, especially as you're reporting around AI and energy and all these things around it.
I think about it
Oh,
constantly. For so long, energy was an issue that was a little bit far away for
yeah.
people. And suddenly I'm asking ChatGPT to help me do my job about a story that's about ChatGPT. Not to disclose my LLM of choice at the moment, but the irony is obvious
Yeah.
that I am part of my own story. And it does concern me. There was a story recently about this journalist at Fortune who is aggressively using AI and writing at least 7 stories a day.
Wow.
And it prompted the Wall Street Journal editor in chief to say, this is great. People need to embrace this. And that concerns me just overall because do we need everybody to write 7 stories a day? Who will read those? Will they be humans? Probably not. They will be bots reading stories that are largely written by bots. So it does concern me. At the same time, I am not an anti-AI person. I use AI a lot, and I wrote a whole article about that actually for Axios about how I use it. So I'm by no means not using it, but it does concern me, and I'm trying to be hyper conscious of how I use it.
Yeah.
Because in addition to the direction that this could send journalism, there's also the very basic human instinct of do we lose our critical thinking skills
Mhm.
the more we use these types of models? And I'm noticing it. And so I'm trying to hold myself back. There's a lot of comparisons that people have made. One that I've noticed with myself is my cursive handwriting has gone totally down the drain. I'm trying to write more to get better at it again. But if you don't use something, it will not stay as good as it used to be. And that's our brains are no different. So I do worry about that. But we're in this, I'm trying to remember to myself, we are in the beginning of this crazy new AI age. This is probably just how it needs to feel, but it's nonetheless overwhelming.
Yeah, and you touched on something in terms of how you use AI so that you can still kind of feel that you're learning on the other side or you don't lose certain skills. Can you just walk us through and for our listeners here how Amy uses AI? I'm just kind of curious. I know you have your whole article on it, but just maybe like the abridged version for us.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I would say I wrote that article, I don't know, 2 to 3 months ago, and it's changed already. So
Yeah.
things are rapidly changing. And I want to say that Axios, as a news company, has been really out in front on this. Just today, our leadership had a meeting where they kind of went through the different types of AI users that they expect in the company. Not everybody will be vibe coding. And I was grateful to hear that because I don't really want to vibe code.
Exactly. Not everyone needs the vibe code, right?
Exactly. There's a reason we all have different skills. I found that reassuring. For me, my metaphor I've used lately is, back when I was, younger on playing computer games or video games, it's kind of like when you get really good at level one and then you go to level two and you immediately die.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I am with AI. I'm very
We try to
good.
get you to level 3 in gaming at least.
Yeah, I need to get to level three. But right now, I'm very good at doing the chat bot with
Sure.
ChatGPT is what I use primarily. I'm very good at having a dialogue with it. I push back on it. It pushes back on me since I've told it to. And in terms of what we talk about, I mean, we talk about everything. Oh my goodness. I mean, I don't use it as a therapist. I know a lot of people do, and I think that's a different topic and an important one. But I use it to do some research preliminarily for stories. I use it to primarily help give feedback on questions that I have for interviews. And I drop in stories to have it edited sometimes. And one time unsolicited, it said, "Would you like me to offer a way to make this not seem too positive?" Because it was a profile of a company.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, well, this isn't a puff piece, it's a real piece of journalism. And I said, yes, sure. And then it did a great job of integrating that.
Oh.
So it's a great brainstorming partner.
Mm.
Now you have to double and triple check.
Mm-hmm.
It's not wrong. It says things like next year is 2026. It somehow still gets the most basic things wrong. And I think what's really important to remember is that ChatGPT and other models will be extremely confident no matter what they say. So you as a human have to have your spidey sense up to be like, that doesn't seem right.
Mm.
And you need to double and triple check. That's very tiring. A term we've written about at Axios is brain fry, where you use AI so much, your brain is feeling like it's getting fried. And I feel like I've felt that sometimes.
Yeah, because I think you as a journalist are naturally trained to triple and double and check everything. But it does feel for the broader population at times, they're not doing that. They're doing the passive once over and then they're sending it out. Does that concern you at all?
Oh,
Yeah.
that's definitely what I think is going on. And it definitely concerns me. I mean, misinformation, whatever term you want to use, was already a humongous problem. And now when people are just going to ask, an AI model and take it as fact, I really worry about that. And I suppose what that means is we as humans need to keep making sure that the information that these models are getting is accurate. But then, of course, you get into this weird philosophical debate where there's a lot of misinformation out there in the world already.
Yeah.
And that's what's going into the models. And so it's a really tricky issue that gets into issues of philosophy. And then I remember my philosophical minor in college, and I get excited to talk about that. But it's that's why this is an energy story, yes, but it's so many other things as
Yeah.
well.
And I've seen like the fast pace. We just talked about it. You things that you wrote about 3 months ago, some of that's even a little bit dated. And I even saw something the other day where they just showed like, robots running a marathon, for example. And a year ago they were tripping over themselves, and now they're able to run, a half marathon. With the pace at which AI and all this is moving, where do you see all this kind of going in the next, kind of short, medium, long?
I saw that half marathon robot race as well, and I just had to wonder, why are we doing this
Yeah.
as a human race? But I digress, because I'm sure that is being used for, maybe they're training to do our laundry eventually.
I hope
That
so.
would be
I
nice.
hope
They can
so.
do it very
Very,
fast.
very quickly.
Exactly. Uh, I've been thinking about this a lot because right now we are in the thick of it. And, some people have likened it to the beginning of the dot-com
That's right.
boom and maybe bust. I anticipate slash hope that we will get to a plateau of some sort. In the, since things are moving so fast, maybe that plateau will come sooner. I'm not as much of an expert to say whether or not this is literally going to be exponential growth for the end of time. I really don't know how we can all sustain that. So I think the most important thing about trying to game out the future is knowing that we don't know that much and being humble and just asking as many questions as possible. And remembering that if you had an experience with a model a month ago or 6 months ago, it's very different and you need to try again. So I just think it's like we're living the future, and it's insane.
It's
Exciting, but also overwhelming.
Yeah, it is overwhelming. Speaking of overwhelming, at a Fortune conference I was at, I talked about how leaders today at the C-suite level have a certain amount of burnout and they're operating at 20% of their battery. You've covered so many of these same types of leaders that you're seeing out in these industries. What do you see when you're interviewing CEOs today? Do you see some of that where they say, especially in the energy and tech space, where they say, I'm good? and they're not really good, or do you think they are good? Just wanted to get your perspective on that.
I think a lot of times CEOs, particularly those at the highest levels, they're not necessarily completely honest with me as a journalist. But other people, when I talk to them off the record, yes, they are overwhelmed. And that's okay to be overwhelmed. I think there's this sense that sometimes people need to feel invincible
Yeah.
and they always have to say yes and they need to always make it look easy. But again, and I know I'm a broken record, but AI is accelerating everything. So it is so obvious that we are not okay as a human race, not to get too meta on you there. But I think everything is moving so fast
Yeah.
that when I talked just the other day, last week, I was at a conference hosted by JP Morgan in Scottsdale, and I was talking to people there, and we were all lamenting about how overwhelmed we feel. And I'm doing a story about this coming up, but I think it's related about just how many ways people have to communicate with us.
Yeah.
We're communicating constantly with each other, and yet at the same time dropping some communications because we are so overwhelmed. I had one CEO who I won't name because I don't know if he wants the world to know this, but he now has an agent that responds to me for him. And I want to ask him someday, like, how is that going? Because when he first told me about it, he had just started it. I think at a certain point, we're going to realize that we can't keep up with this as humans, and
Yeah.
we might need to dial it back somehow.
Yeah, well said. And Amy, I've got so many more questions for you, and I was just hoping and wondering, can you stick around for a part two?
Of course, I am here for it.
Oh my God, that sounds so great. So to all our listeners who are out there, we'll be back soon for a part two here with Amy. So stay in your seats.